Good evening, everyone. This program is sponsored by the Woodside Arts and Culture Committee, a group of volunteers here in the town trying to promote interesting programs with culture, art, history, all kinds, as well as music. And I'll talk more about that at the end because we have an exciting program coming up next month. And this evening we are very fortunate to have Mitch back with us. He's the president of the Historic Association, as you can see here, and he's going to be talking about the new and exciting addition to the museum of the Carriage House. When we think about modern technology, it really comes back to that person or persons who invented the wheel, because that's where this all started. And so when you think about carriages, whether it be the covered wagons that brought the pioneers or royalty to become married or to gain their throne, there's been all kinds of carriages, and we've been very fortunate because even here in the town of Woodside, there are people who have their own little carriages, and every now and then we'll see them out and about in our city streets, and that's not something very common in most other communities. So without further ado, and no more talking from myself at this moment, here is it. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Tom. And thank you for having me tonight, to letting me speak to you about our San Mateo County Historical Association and its exciting new program to add a carriage house to our museum in Redwood City. I'd like to introduce just a couple of people here that I should. And the leader of the fundraising for this project is here, and that's Margaret McNiven. Margaret, thank you. One of our great volunteers that also helps with all the fundraising is Seiko Peterson, who's here. And we have some members of the staff that are here. Carmen Blair is keeping me in slides, and she's been working very hard for an hour and a half already. And Gail Rudolph is also here. She's helping with the fundraising. Another member of our staff from Sanchez Adobe is Sandy Hersel, is here. So thank you. So I paid all these people to be here. So you get the sense. Okay, so we'll go into the first slide. This exciting new project that we're taking on, the building of a museum addition, which will be known as the Toby Family Carriage House and Automobile Gallery. So tonight I'm going to talk about why this project. For us, it makes sense. We are always in the business of placing our San Mateo County history in context to larger themes of California and Western history. This building will help us do so in a very attractive way. Note all the windows, which will allow the public to understand exciting attractions are happening within. This is a map of our San Mateo County History Museum block in Redwood City. It is bounded by Broadway at the bottom, Hamilton to the left, Marshall at the top, and Middlefield to the right. When completed, the Carriage House will join the current museum and Lathrop House as a great addition to the San Francisco Peninsula's cultural offerings. This is our museum face on Broadway. Many know it as the old courthouse, built in 1910. We moved in 1998. And between then and 2006, $20 million were spent on this block. Half came from the Redwood City Redevelopment Agency to create the public square and restore the front of the building, and half was raised by us from private contributions to accomplish some interior restoration and to create some state-of-the-art exhibits. Altogether, we have installed 7 permanent and 2 changing exhibit galleries. This is our recently recreated Immigrants Gallery. Most people know today that about a third of the population of our county has been born in another country. However, a lot of people don't realize that back in 1880, a third of the population of San Mateo County was born in another country. So immigration is topical, of course, but it's also historical and something that we felt was important to do. The The carriage house will further allow us to tell the story, another kind of story, of how our peninsula became the first rail suburb of the West. First, okay? That's important, and we'll come back to it. Originally, could we have had a suburban experience? Here is the San Mateo stagecoach stop just before the railroad came through. The answer is a resounding no. It took 9 hours to get from San Francisco to San Jose. Now, don't any of you Silicon Valley commuters tell me, that's what it took me today. No, don't tell me that. But anyways, it took 9 hours by stagecoach. San Francisco to San Jose. It was expensive, $32 in that famous year of 1849, and uncomfortable. So these stations, or roadhouses, existed to ease the journey, and each was kind of special in its own kind of foods that it prepared. The specialty drink at the San Mateo house was something called San Mateo Punch, which, if you can imagine, in the days before refrigeration, was a concoction of milk and gin. But if you were uncomfortable enough in the stagecoach, you probably had 2 or 3 of those. It was only after the San Francisco to San Jose Railroad came down the peninsula in 1864 that it became possible to live in the country but work in the city. The San Francisco to San Jose Railroad was the first commuter railroad west of the Mississippi. Okay? It beat the Transcontinental Railroad by 5 years. So this was very, very early in railroading history in the West. But still, living in the suburbs in those days wasn't for everyone. It was still expensive. To get from a place like Burlingame up to San Francisco in 1875 cost $1. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot now, but in those days, the average American worker was making about $1 a day. So it was expensive. It also had a peculiar kind of schedule. The first train to leave Burlingame left at 9 o'clock. Get up to the city around 9:30, check in at the office at 10, lunch at the club. The last train to leave San Francisco to get back down the peninsula left at 4 o'clock. So this is not for everyone. So you're getting a sense that this was kind of a special group that were our first suburbanites, were our first commuters. This became known in local history as the era of the great estates or the era of many mansions. Former stagecoach stops like San Mateo began to resemble old world villages. With the estates all around, the villagers catered to the mansion owners and their hundreds of employees. I love this photo because it features a railroad locomotive to the right, and then you see the stage is in the center, which is, so San Mateo is the connection to get to Half Moon Bay, so people are making that connection. And then over on the left, you see those elegant carriages? So those original suburbanites, those original commuters, they're either boarding or getting off the train, being met by their drivers. Who really worked and lived on these estates? There were about 100 of them or so down the peninsula. Well, they were the gardeners, the ranch hands, the horse breeders, trainers, stable hands, household servants, cooks, and many others. They comprised a large percentage of the population of San Mateo County during the early American period of California history. They were who we were. This is John Parrott's estate, west of San Mateo. The house sat at about where the main library in San Mateo is today. This is Parrott aboard his Spider Phaeton, which is similar to the Phaeton, Spider Phaeton we will have on display in the Carriage house. Parrott had an exciting life. As American consul at Mazatlan during the Mexican-American War, he was sort of a spy. After the war, he came to Gold Rush era San Francisco and became a successful businessman, most famous for building the concrete commercial block in Montgomery in California, which was the first of its type in the city. This is W.D.M. Howard's Rancho San Mateo. Howard actually obtained this property, which stretched from central Burlingame all the way down in San Mateo to Mills Hospital. He obtained this before the gold rush even. This is Alvinza Hayward's mansion. It kind of is reminiscent of that Carson mansion up in Eureka, isn't it? His estate ranged from Central Park in San Mateo to Highway 92, and from El Camino all the way to the bay. It featured stables made of mahogany wood, a zoo, a private zoo, and a racetrack, all in one person's property. This is an interior shot of Hayward's place. He made his fortune from the Comstock Silver Rush at the 1860s and 70s. Here's Christmas at the Hayward house. Do they look merry? No? So maybe money doesn't buy you everything. This is an interior photo of Antoine Borel's house, a Swiss banker. He became an important financier in San Francisco. His San Mateo estate stretched from the Parrots' lands all the way down past Highway 92. He was west of Hayward's estate. And here again is the San Mateo train station for the village during the day. It was hemmed in by the estates on all sides, which precluded growth and made establishment of family-owned farms impossible. B Street was the main thoroughfare in those days as it ran parallel to the train tracks. So the main part of town now had moved from El Camino down to the railroad tracks, and it stayed there for decades. Merchants of the village catered to the estates and the recreational pursuits of all San Franciscans in general. Villagers also catered to those that worked on the estates. The little village of San Mateo, which in the 1880s might have had 500 residents, had more than a dozen saloons. So, the people from the estates would come and they would probably talk about their bosses. It was families like the Wisdoms that started businesses in San Mateo. Immigrants from Ireland, the family became prominent as part of the village's new middle class. Along with various commercial endeavors, they engaged in the trades and built many of the first homes in the area. The streetcar reached San Mateo in 1902 and opened an opportunity for a new kind of commuter and a new type of suburb. The streetcar was less expensive, 25 cents round trip into San Francisco, and it ran around the clock. So this was much more a popular choice for commuting. And now the middle class could afford to live in the country and work in the city. Soon after the streetcar reached the peninsula came the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and fire. Refugees used the trolley to come down into San Mateo County, where they built up places like Burlingame, San Mateo, and Belmont, and started new towns like Daly City and San Bruno. However, the era of the estates was slow to close. One of the last of the estates was created by William Bourne. Born in San Francisco in 1857, Bourne is credited with reviving his family's failing Empire gold mine in Grass Valley. Then in the 1890s, he bought up and sold power companies to the emerging Pacific Gas and Electric Company. With that capital, he bought up the Spring Valley Water Company in 1908. The utility, as a privately owned monopoly, controlled all of San Francisco's water supply. However, the company's infrastructure was severely damaged during the earthquake and fire. Thus, Bourne picked it up at a bargain price. All along, his plan was to sell the 20,000-acre watershed to the city of San Francisco. He had to wait 22 years to do so. And so, while waiting, he bought up about 700 acres just south of his Crystal Springs Lake for $90,000 to create Filoli, named after his motto, "Fight, Love, Live." His architect was the famous Willis Polk, and the family moved into Filoli in 1917. This age of many mansions was adversely affected by World War I, The Great Depression, and especially World War II, all created economic problems. But the Filoli estate, but Filoli as an estate stayed intact for many years, long past others disappearing. The second owners of Filoli were the William P. Roth family. Mrs. Roth eventually gifted the property to the National Trust for Historic Preservation in 1973. And at that same time, she gave her significant carriage collection to our San Mateo County Historical Association. This included vehicles that were original to the Borden family. Our plan is to display most of these carriages in our carriage house. It gives us the chance to interpret the era of the great estates on our peninsula. These vehicles include this magnificent light park drag built by the Brewster Company of New York in 1904. Brewster, which kept incredible records, lists its original owner as Clarence Wayland Watson, a coal mining baron and senator from West Virginia. Brewster may mean little to us now, but at the turn of the century, of the 20,000 carriage makers that there were in the United States, there was no peer. They were the best carriage makers in America. And they proved themselves in 1878 when they were challenged to display their carriages and compete in a competition in Paris. Before that time, it was judged that American carriages were subpar to their European counterparts. But Brewster entered the carriages into 13 different competitions, 13 different makes of these carriages, and won first place in every category. And the exciting part for us is that of the 13 types, we have 9 of the types. Now, we don't have the actual ones that were shown in Paris, but we do have 9 of the types so that we can interpret that glorious occasion in 1878 when Brewster really made an impact on the way that people thought about Americans and the way that they constructed fancy vehicles like carriages. This light park drag was one that you would get on top and you could see things from it, and you would appreciate if people could see that you were there. You would take it to the races and the polo matches and picnics, etc. It could accommodate 17. Present also were little cubby holes and wooden boxes that you could put all your wine supply there, cocktail glasses. And it was really an elegant vehicle that was it was the top of the line for Brewster, certainly. Also on display in the new carriage house will be this, and also from the Roth collection, will be this beautiful 4-passenger basket phaeton made with wicker, complete with fringed parasol top. Note, as with all our Roth carriages, the lanterns are still present. Lanterns are the first accessory stripped from 19th century vehicles by the collectors. So when you've got one with the original lanterns, that means that you've got a real collector's piece. During the Gilded Age, wicker vehicles like this one were popular for use on country estates and in fashionable resort areas. The Spider Phaeton, remember we saw John Parrott driving something like it, was built by Brewster in 1900. Phaetons are characterized by being owner-driven. The name Phaeton is derived from Greek mythology. Apollo's son, Phaeton, recklessly drove his father's chariot that pulled the sun. A unique feature of this vehicle is that its oval lamps are electrically powered, so it had a battery that was aboard. This governess's cart from the Roth collection was built in 1890. It had a wicker body and is unusual in that it had 4 wheels instead of 2. This vehicle was considered to be especially safe for children, and that if the horse pulling it reared up, the passengers would be less likely to be thrown out. The cart was designed to transport kids to school or other outings by a governess. Children would occasionally drive it by using a pony. This Brewster Victoria was built in 1903. Note, it has no doors and would have been driven by a coachman. As documented by Brewster, the original owner was William Bourne. He purchased the 1,100-pound carriage for $2,800 in that year, 1903. Brewster built this omnibus in 1901. The driver sat up front, passengers sat in the enclosed body. The glass attached to this vehicle is original, as is a functioning bell for the coachman. So you would hit the bell if there was something that was needed. Brewster built this Lady's Phaeton in 1907. It is a two-person carriage with a cabriolet top. As it was designed to be owner-driven, it demonstrates how women, as well as men, could enjoy the sport and recreation of pleasure driving. Note the rumple seat in the back was for the footman. Brewster built this Brougham in 1903 for William Bourne. Its interior featured tufted leather. In other words, we call it tuck and roll today. Plates attached to the doors, and these are really cool, can knock off mud from the steps. So if you stepped up on the carriage to get into the passenger seat, when you closed the door, the plate on the door would knock off the mud. And the craftsmanship that goes into a fit that'll work that way is amazing. It sounds simple, but it's really pretty cool. This is a two-seater. Brahms could be found for 4, passengers of 4. This one was for 2. 1 or 2 horses would power the vehicle. In England, Brahms were used as the first taxicabs. This Studebaker roof seat brake tells us that besides showing the Roth collection of Brewster's, we will display other vehicles of the era as well. This one is an excursion wagon, Studebaker again, from 1890. Sometimes it's called a roof seat brake. And this one was sold from Studebaker's facilities in San Francisco. We know because it says San Francisco on the hubcaps. This vehicle was owned by Charles Holbrook, whose estate was at today's Atherton. We have quite a few vehicles from the Holbrook estate that we'll be displaying from time to time, including this. This is a Sicilian donkey cart from 1900. Note its wood is highly carved and very ornate. The underside of the cart is painted with colorful images of a medieval battle and St. George slaying a dragon. By the 1880s, Sicilian carts had become popular as novelty vehicles and were imported by wealthy Americans. This is a staff favorite. This is our Standard Oil wagon from the early 20th century and was contributed to the History Museum by E.T.M. Callahan, former president of the Standard Oil Company. Now imagine a time when gasoline was distributed to dry goods stores by horse-drawn wagons for sale to horseless carriage owners. We have a really cool picture of this particular vehicle on El Camino Real here in San Mateo County. Also more mundane is this International Harvester manure spreader in our collection at Runnymede Farm right here in Woodside. Also at Runnymede is this gooseneck work wagon. Studebaker had been building Brahms since the 1830s. This is in our collection too. President Harrison had one. This Studebaker of the 1890s is much larger than our Brewster from Filoli. It had capacity to sit 4 passengers. It came to the Historical Association from the Holbrook estate of Atherton. Now this rare French Brahms is possibly one of only 2 in the Western Hemisphere. Built in 1885, it is smaller and more delicate than its American counterparts. The carriage was used by Dr. Charles N. Ellenwood, who used it in the streets of San Francisco until his death in 1917. We also have his doctor's buggy, which is said to be the last of its kind to be used in San Francisco as well. Currently, most of our 30 vehicles are stored in this building in San Mateo, which the Historical Association built in 1987. Many of them are destined for display on the second floor of the Carriage House. Others will be used for temporary shows on the ground floor. Now, what made our project possible, because the county just wasn't going to give up a parking lot, but the county desired to move this Lathrop House from the middle of their campus there in Redwood City to our block in order to develop their new county government center. So we became sort of a key piece in their puzzle. Here it is halfway across the street on its way to our block. Here it is in place. The house was built in 1863 for Benjamin Lathrop and his family. Lathrop was an early organizer of San Mateo County when it was formed in 1856. We asked the county to place the house as close as possible to the Hamilton Street side so that we could build a carriage house on the Middlefield side. Our plan is to fence the block so that one ticket can get the public in to see all three venues: the History Museum, Carriage House, Lathrop House. Here's a map showing the area to be covered by the Lathrop House and Carriage House. Note that we will have a courtyard in between them to allow for educational programs and other activities. Here are the plans for the Carriage's ground floor that will be used for changing displays. And this is an artist's concept of how the ground floor will appear. We are planning for the first show, which will open along with the building in 2026, to focus on 100 years of the Ford Motor Company in San Mateo County. There will be a Ford for each decade. As part of the fun, on opening day, skilled volunteers will demonstrate how to disassemble and then assemble a Ford Model T in less than 1 hour. I'm told that they can do it in far quicker, too. I mean, it's just amazing. You can see these demonstrations on the internet if you're really interested. This is a map of the second floor. It will feature our Brewster carriages, which cover the upper half of this layout. The lower left will be an interpretive station for children. They will be able to experience how to drive a horse-drawn vehicle. The lower right will be a conservation and demonstration corner. In between will be changing exhibits. This is an artist's concept of how the Brewsters will look along the windows facing Marshall Street. Against the wall to the right will be 7 huge Victorian mirrors taken from local estates. The effect will be to make the room appear quite spacious. It's going to be gorgeous. The projected special events floor will be able to seat 200 for a dinner. The Carriage House project is costing the Historical Association about $17.5 million, of which we have raised nearly $14 million. However, we still have $3.5 million to go. Right, Margaret and Dale? Yeah, right. Okay, so there. Okay. This is the design for our recognition piece, hint, which will be placed at the entrance to the addition. It will be a 3-dimensional presentation using the exact dimensions of the back wheel from our light park drag as the model. The larger donations will be in the center, and the other contributions will gradually set back. In the middle will be the Tad Toby family. Tad is a Woodside philanthropist who is contributing $7 million to the project. Here's Tad at our groundbreaking ceremony in September. The project is scheduled to be completed in some 24 months, again, 2026. So back to that original question. So why this project? Because it is a wonderful way to attract new audiences through the auto gallery and special events venue. In the second floor, with the carriage displays, will help us define San Mateo County history during a certain period. In the work of the San Mateo County Historical Association, we are constantly attempting to place our story in context to larger themes of California and Western history, thus giving our efforts more purpose. We tell these stories with artifacts and then interpret those things for the public to illustrate the story of our past. We have no greater set of objects to tell the story of the age of many mansions than our carriages. Age of many mansions, so what's all that about again? Well, from the macro lens, this is the story of how the leading families of California, who controlled society, politics, and the economy of the West from their offices in San Francisco, chose to live on the rural lands to the south in San Mateo County. Through the decades, we have presented the stories of the great estate owners in different ways. Our association's first historian, Dr. Stanger, and this was his great book, South from San Francisco, he lionized the estate owners. They were our founding fathers of California and hence of San Mateo County. However, by the early 1980s, revision, of course, was setting in history. And this is a book that was my best friend, and at one point before he died, was Al Hinding, and he wrote this book. And he had a completely different take on these estate owners. And here, this is a quote from his book. As a group, the Peninsula squirearchy that men like Hayward, Flood, and Mills typified shared distinct characteristics. None of them had received what would today be called a higher education, and many had not gotten as far as high school. Nearly all were self-made men in the much-admired Horatio Alger tradition in the day. They were rough-hewn individuals of little grace and even less philanthropy who clung to a conservative politics, a work ethic modified by new wealth and leisure, and an ethical code shaped by the cutthroat environment in which they had risen. Outside the realm of business, they were somewhat dumb, but dull, pompous people rather than eccentric or imaginative innovators, nor were they particularly concerned about their civic responsibilities. Jim Flood, who by the age of 45 enjoyed a tax-free income of $250,000 a month from his Nevada mining and other investments, endowed no charities and built no libraries, museums, hospitals, schools, or parks. $250,000 a month in the 1870s, and with no income taxes, that was pretty good money. Well, okay, remember how Hinding just handled Flood, okay? So here's Stanger, okay, back to south from San Francisco, 20 years before, anticipating Hinding. Because he writes, James Flood, probably because he suffered keenly in childhood from the chagrin of being poor, developed a driving determination to become rich. He succeeded so well, by the age of 45, he was enjoying an income of $250,000 a month. He was neither a miser nor spendthrift. In the inevitable battles between giants of finance, he handled himself successfully under a code of ethics that was at least as virtuous as those of his adversaries. And while he fought off the equally inevitable army of panhandlers and refused to spoil people with gifts, he proved that he was not entirely lacking in generosity. Not a few young men were fitted out by him with blocks of promising stocks and guided in the right use of them so as to earn a financial start in life. And in gifts to charity and other causes, he was not cheap or mean. He did not endow a college or a hospital, nor did he set up a fund for the better education of poor men's sons. If he had, he would have been living ahead of his times. Not even the Carnegies or the Rockefellers had developed that kind of social conscience in his day. So it's all the same information, it's the interpretation, right? And today now, how are we going to handle this? Since moving our museum to the courthouse in 1998, we have been sort of avoiding the subject, actually. Instead, we have focused on, one, the natural resources of the peninsula, how they helped our earliest people, and how these resources helped build San Francisco during the time when the city was the most important metropolis on the Pacific slope of North America. And two, how transportation improvements made it possible for the peninsula to become the suburb of the city, from the railroad to the trolley cars to the freeways to BART. And 3, how the diversity of the peninsula is rooted in its past. We alluded to that just a while ago. And finally, how we had a rough and tumble political beginning, leading one gangster to label ours the most corrupt county in all of California by the 1930s. But now we are faced with focusing again on the subject of the estates, their owners, and the people who made their livings because of these estates. Ours will be a balancing act. We will not pay glowing tribute to the great families the way Stanger did, but unlike Hinding, we will recognize the importance of their activities. They did shape the history of the West. From a micro perspective, here is Hinding's 1982 assessment of the impact of the estates, now locally, on San Mateo County. Oddly, it was the railroad, that forerunner of progress, that helped discourage rapid growth in San Mateo County until the 20th century. The new era that began with the creation of the county soon came to be dominated by the railroad barons and their associates. The presence of the mansion aristocracy retarded development. Hemmed in by estate lands, most Bayside settlements had little opportunity or incentive to expand during the late 19th century. What had become a mutually beneficial arrangement at first, in the end produced a static community, functioning as a semi-feudal relationship among the wealthy gentry and tenant farmers, estate workers, and villagers. Census records from the post-Civil War decades support this view. As late as 1900, barely 12,000 people lived in the county. Okay, now I'm going to separate myself from the quote for just a minute. 12,000 people in all of San Mateo County, that's about the size of Half Moon Bay and El Granada today. So you stretch that population out from Brisbane to East Palo Alto, and from Daly City to Año Nuevo, you see this is really a very rural place still in 1900. In a comparison, the San Francisco population was about 400,000 at the same time. Even rugged, thinly settled Santa Cruz County had surpassed San Mateo County's 1900 figure 20 years before. In Santa Cruz County in 1880 was already 12,000 people. As the 20th century began, San Mateo County registered a gain of less than 6,000 people since 1870 and had, by 1900, the smallest population of any Bay Area county. Okay? There's no refuting what Hinding's saying. The population numbers prove his point. Also, contemporary descriptions of the Bay communities by travelers and observers, like Sunset Magazine, throw a lot of light on this. They frequently remark about how these places, these communities on the bayside of our peninsula, remarked about how these places resembled European villages catering to aristocratic landed gentry rather than American Western towns. Stanger may have countered the Hinding interpretation by asserting that light development of the peninsula in the 19th century made rural San Mateo County that much more attractive for development in the 20th. As stated, a major perspective of our interpretation will focus on who it was that worked on the estates and who it was that created the villages to cater to the needs of the owners and the many families that served them. There were people from all over the world that were part of this picture and gave San Mateo County a lot of its early diversity. Were working on these estates. After all, these were the original people of our county during the early American period of California history. Thank you.
I appreciate all of you coming here this evening. Now, I would like to ask you to do a favor for us. The town of Woodside is considering removing the Committee of Arts and Culture from the town, and that would mean no more First Fridays. So if you've enjoyed our programs for more than 10 years that we've been doing them, I would advocate that you take a few moments and send an email or a letter to let the town of Woodside know how you feel about the Arts and Culture Committee and the First Friday event. So thank you for considering that.
And
once
come
it-
to the town council meeting.
and come to the town council meeting on the 25th, where there's going to be a study session. So if you don't have anything else to do that evening, we would appreciate your support. Otherwise, thank you very much for coming this evening.